Hello, and thank you for joining the Food Safety Educational Conference as part of the 2021 Virtual Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Conference. I'm Billy Mitchell, the FSMA Training Coordinator with the National Farmers Union, and I'll be the moderator for this presentation. I'd like to thank Highland Ag Solutions for sponsoring the 2021 Food Safety Educational Conference. Let's watch this short video provided by Highland Ag Solutions.
Highland is virtualizing the business of agriculture. From soil to sale, we are uniting growers, packers, marketers, and their customers in ways never done before. In today's global marketplace, competition has never been fiercer. You need innovative tools to provide business and market transparency for the industry to remain sustainable for future generations.
Thank you. Pesticide CEU and CCA credits are available for most presentations offered during the live Southeast Regional Conference. Check the Pesticide CEU guide for a list of approved presentations and participating states. The Pesticide CEU guide is located in the Event Resources tab under the Media player. The guide is also available at the Resources Center located on the main menu of the conference platform. Please note, pesticide credits will only be available for 1, registered attendees, and 2, only during the live conference. Credits will not be available for on-demand viewing. There is a simple 3-step process to receive pesticide CEU and CCA credits. First, go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. Again, go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. You will need to do this for every presentation to request CEU credits. Second, the second step is to sign out at the end of every presentation. To sign out, go to the audience chat box and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. You will be reminded to sign out at the end of the presentation. And third, the third step is to complete the pesticide CEU registration. You only have to complete this registration one time during the conference. This is not required with every presentation. To access the pesticide CEU registration web link, open the pesticide CEU guide on the Event Resources tab located under the Media player. The pesticide CEU registration web link is located on the front cover of the guide. This presentation is pre-recorded to reduce technical difficulties. We will be answering your questions live at the end of the presentation. You can submit a question at any point during this presentation by typing your question in the questions box and pressing send. And don't forget to thank our 2021 conference sponsors and exhibitors by visiting the virtual trade show and featured products pavilion. And lastly, don't forget to join us each morning for coffee chats and each evening for networking. Check the conference agenda for details. Now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer McIntyre, Senior Vice President of Food Safety and Technology with United Fresh, who will be presenting Cyclospora, how industry can control a pathogen we know so little about. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Billy, and thanks to the meeting organizers for inviting me to present on this very challenging topic. First, a little bit of background. So I am with United Fresh Produce Association. We're the national trade association for the produce industry based in Washington, D.C. And I've spent my entire career, almost 20 years, working in Washington, D.C. I was trained as a food microbiologist, but I have not been in the laboratory for many, many years. And I say I'm trained as a food microbiologist, but as I think about Cyclospora, I realize really my expertise is in bacteriology, and Cyclospora is a parasite, a very different type of organism that I feel kind of uncomfortable proclaiming that I have some sort of expertise when it comes to Cyclospora. I have worked across many different types of commodities. I love produce. I find produce to be very challenging, but very interesting. And this organism is very interesting and perplexing to me as well. Part of why I like working in Washington, D.C. is because I get to work with the federal government, with academics, with the consumer groups, and of course with the industry. And as an association, we represent any of the entities in the supply chain that touch or handle produce. So from grower shippers through to retail, food service, and everything in between. This is how I feel about Cyclospora. It is very frustrating to me. As I mentioned, it is a parasite. It's not a bacterium, so it's a more highly evolved organism. It has a very complex life cycle that we're still working to figure out. There are times at which the organism is infectious and times at which the organism is not infectious. And we're still trying to understand what that trigger is that causes it to morph between being not infectious into being infectious. We think that humans are the only host. I'm not certain about that, but there's no research to suggest at this point in time that you would find Cyclospora cayetanensis in anything other than a human actively growing. One of the things about this parasite, and that if humans are the only host, is that they don't grow outside of the host. They don't grow in a laboratory. So this is, again, is unlike bacteria, so it's really difficult to do experiments with Cyclospora because the only Cyclospora available are the ones that have been shed by those human hosts. So it's really difficult to do research to better our understanding of this organism. It's historically been associated with tropical environments, and there was, the notion that there were certain parts of the world where Cyclospora was endemic in that population, resulting in seasonal outbreaks from that later spring through the summer period. But we've since found Cyclospora in several places here within the United States and on US grown product. So this has really heightened our attention to the need to control Cyclospora. We know that it's very difficult to kill. We know that washwater antimicrobials that are effective at limiting cross-contamination of bacteria like E. coli, Salmonella, they're not effective against Cyclospora. And if you're interested in more background on this organism, hopefully you, prior to joining this session, had heard Dr. Ortega's presentation. She is a worldwide expert on Cyclospora and knows much more about the parasite itself than I do. What I can speak to is what's been happening in this from the regulatory side and from the industry consequence side. So to back up just a little bit, there are recalls. Recalls are increasingly visible, communicated to the general public and certainly to the industry. Mostly we hear about those class 1 recalls. That's where these are the types of organisms like the pathogenic E. coli, the Salmonella, the Listeria monocytogenes that would cause serious adverse health consequences or death to humans or animals. But there's another class of recalls, and those are the class 2 recalls. That's where there's a health consequence, but it's not as serious as the class 1. And oddly, or not, Cyclospora has historically been classified as a class 2 recall when there's a product issue. So Cyclospora, to the best of our knowledge, doesn't really kill people. It causes illness that's extremely unpleasant, but doesn't kill people the way that Salmonella or E. coli can. With the increased recognition of the burden of illness with Cyclospora, I do wonder if we'll see Cyclospora classified as a class 1 more often, just to push the industry to better control it, which, as I'll discuss, is a really challenging thing to do at this point in time. FDA does have some guidance. This is a grower, a farmer guidance document that you can find on FDA's website, or feel free to contact me and I can send you a direct link. But one of the questions that FDA addresses is, what can I, the farmer, the grower, do to reduce the likelihood of contaminating fresh produce with Cyclospora cayetanensis? And FDA emphasizes the hygiene controls. So toilet facilities, again, if humans are the only host, we're concerned about toilets, We're concerned about hand washing, but there's not much more here that I see that FDA is recommending than what most growers already do as part of good agricultural practices. FDA does acknowledge in their document that the parasite needs specific environmental conditions to become infectious. And that within a laboratory, we can see that it's a combination of time and temperature, warmer temperatures that take a week or 2 weeks for the organism to transition from its non-infectious form straight out of the human into the form that's going to cause illness in someone else. And so this is not a direct fecal-oral type of contamination. It's not that someone didn't use the restroom properly, didn't wash their hands, touches a product, and you eat that product and you're going to get sick. There needs to be some time factor. We believe, at least in the lab, it's been shown that we need some time for the organism to change forms. Again, how much time? What are the exact conditions? We're not really sure out in the growing environment. Are we talking about maybe Cyclospora that's somehow found its way into water, into a field? Is that time that elapses before a product is harvested, is that sufficient? Is this direct contact with the product and then the time when the product is packed, it's shipped, it's out on the store shelf? Is that the time frame that we're looking at? We're really not certain right now. FDA also recognizes, as I mentioned earlier, that although chlorine and other antimicrobial washes are effective at reducing bacteria and viruses, they're not as effective on Cyclospora cayetanensis. FDA speculates or suggests that Cyclospora could be controlled by microfiltration, so just physical removal of the organism. Ozone or UV treatments may be effective at decreasing populations of Cyclospora cayetanensis in irrigation waters. So from the standpoint of implementation and who would be responsible for that implementation of, ozone or UV treatment of irrigation waters, that we're talking about, probably a heavy lift there. But FDA, despite not having, a clear message of if you do this, you'll be okay when it comes to Cyclospora, FDA has issued relatively recently a warning letter to a firm that was associated with an outbreak of Cyclosporiasis. And I pulled, this is a publicly available warning letter on FDA's website, and I pulled some of the information that I'd like to draw your attention to. So FDA says that the presence of Cyclospora cayetanensis in this product causes the product to be adulterated as defined within the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the FD&C. FDA goes on to say that because we believe that humans are the only host, that the presence of Cyclospora in food is an indication of direct or indirect contamination with human feces. And therefore, because there's an indicator of human feces, this means that the product has been prepared, packed, or held under insanitary conditions, whereby it may have been contaminated with filth or rendered injurious to health. So FDA is calling out two things here. First, that the presence of Cyclospora itself causes the product to be adulterated, and secondly, that Cyclospora means there's been fecal contamination. If there's been fecal contamination, the product is considered adulterated too. So you're in a no-win situation, even if there's this indirect contamination, and we don't know the routes of contamination that have occurred that have caused some of these historical outbreaks. So FDA goes on in this warning letter and says to the firm, you provided FDA with your testing results that showed no detection of Cyclospora cayetanensis in any of the samples. But FDA says that that's not surprising. Cyclospora may be in low numbers. Contamination may be sporadic or random, and it's not uncommon to see many negatives even when contamination has occurred. So then you start thinking, what am I supposed to do if FDA is saying that it's very difficult on the front end to control Cyclospora, that the antimicrobials that are in more common use are not effective, that what we need to manage is toilet facilities, hand washing, what we've already been doing, and that we can't use testing as an indication that something may have gone wrong? What can one do? FDA's suggestion is focus on hand washing, especially for your harvesting crew, sanitation and cleaning for portable toilets, worker health, so monitoring for ill workers, hygiene, harvest practices, foot traffic. Now, I think what's important to note here is, although they mention harvesting crew, we also need to think about that time factor, that 1 to 2 weeks. So maybe we should focus not only on these practices at the point of harvest, but also in the weeks prior, when people may, I don't want to say that they would be less attentive, but where there may not be that focus like, oh, I'm about to harvest the product, when other things are happening in fields. Are there vulnerabilities there that maybe could be managed? FDA also talks about surveillance, so not testing product, but testing the area. Water, for example, they don't call that out, but as many of you are probably well aware, FDA did find Cyclospora cayetanensis in the canal system in Florida. It's been found through some CPS-funded projects in other types of water environments. So should an individual company conduct this water testing, this sort of surveillance, or how can we accomplish this to better understand if Cyclospora is out there in the general environment in which we're growing product? On the industry side, there have been some efforts to better understand the organism and compile what we do know about this parasite. So in June 2019, the interim report of the Blue Ribbon Panel was published. I and several others were part of this process. The report is broken into a couple of big sections. First, how you would do a root cause assessment. So if an outbreak occurred, if known contamination had occurred, how do you figure out what happened? The second is on the preventive measures. So how can we limit the likelihood that Cyclospora would contaminate the product? And many of those preventive measures are the things that should already be pretty well under control, maybe just tightening up and being even more attentive to gaps. The third part of the Blue Ribbon Panel report focuses more on the outbreak investigation. So once an issue has already occurred, how do we communicate around Cyclospora? How do we communicate with the industry? What information is available to the government, to consumers, when it comes to this outbreak that's already happened? And then lastly, but to me most importantly, is getting a better handle on the test method. So how do we know that Cyclospora is there in the first place, especially when it occurs in very low numbers and we can't grow it up? It's not as easy to get high numbers as it does for some other organisms. And when we have this life cycle issue that we're dealing with, how do we know that Cyclospora, even if it's detected, would actually cause illness? Currently, the methods to assess that are very challenging, difficult to implement. It would, in my opinion, it would not be reasonable for an individual company to do this sort of work. This takes some expertise in terms of the method at this point in time. So since 2014, the Center for Produce Safety has funded 8 research projects related to Cyclospora for a total of over $2 million invested in trying to understand the organism. I would say that the initial projects focused on surveillance. Where is Cyclospora? Can we find it? At this point in time, back 5-6 years ago, there wasn't great methodology and there wasn't alignment on methodology. So in some ways it can make some of those results difficult to compare to each other in terms of sensitivity and in terms of findings. More recent work has focused, we've asked the researchers to tell us, how can we control it? So the title of this presentation, how can industry control a pathogen that we know so little about? We really want to focus on prevention and on control. So some of the more recent projects, that is their focus. In this current round of CPS funding, the 2021 request for proposals, there were 2 subtopics associated with Cyclospora, both under the the growing research that we wanted to assist on the growing side. One is clearly Cyclospora control. So how can we kill it or how can we remove it? We've got a number of researchers who are proposing some approaches that they would like funding to try. And the second topic, it was called Cyclospora transfer. If you read the lengthier description under what was desired there, it recognizes what occurred this summer associated with Florida from, if you read FDA's communications, and seeking to better understand how does seepage irrigation serve or not serve as a natural kind of filtration for this parasite. So it's physically much larger than bacteria. How does it or can it move through different types of soils up through the soil along with the water? So hopeful that we'll have some good proposals and be able to fund those. I'm not sure at this point in time, but this is the research that CPS focused on, the specific types of projects that CPS was hoping researchers would be interested in doing work on. Currently, there is, I'll say, an informal industry effort to work together. Some of the firms who have been more involved in this topic, who have been affected by Cyclospora, coming together and saying, here's exactly what we need. We know the handful of researchers, both on the academic side as well as on the government side, as well as in private laboratories and test kit manufacturers, who are able to work with Cyclospora. So we want to bring them together and first resolve this issue of having the physical organism to work with. So is there an opportunity to use a surrogate? Can we learn from an organism that's similar to Cyclospora, but easier to grow, easier to handle? We need to know if mitigations work. And we can't determine if mitigations work if we don't have a method to assess that change. Something got better, something got worse. Another thing that I haven't talked about yet is genetic typing. So you may be aware that when people get listeriosis or salmonellosis or E. coli infections, that whole genome sequencing is done on those clinical isolates. It's put into a database, and when FDA goes into a facility, they're swabbing for listeria. If they find it, they sequence it, they put it into the database. This has become kind of standard fare for bacteria. We don't have that ability truly for Cyclospora for a couple of reasons. So it is a more complicated organism. There is a way now that genetic typing can be done from the clinical side. So we can at least determine how many different outbreaks are going on. It's not done quite in real time yet, although we're making excellent progress. So we don't have a good handle on of these 1,000, 2,000 illnesses. Are they even related to each other genetically? So we're making improvements there. When product has been tested, or even when water has been tested, the amount of Cyclospora found is so low that there's not enough genetic material to do this kind of typing. So we're unable to match were the Cyclospora found in Florida a match to the clinicals? We simply lack the ability to make that determination right now from the scientific, technical standpoint. I'm hopeful that we can, because we need this information to make these ties, to understand better where in the country, where in the world is the organism that has caused this population to become ill. How did it get onto this particular product? So we're lacking right now in being able to put the puzzle pieces together as well as at least I would like. What we can do in the meantime, I think, is try to understand where are people getting sick from Cyclospora and when. Why is it seasonal? How is it regional? Monitor those illnesses in the population and see if that tells us, the larger scientific community, the larger food safety community, tells us a little bit more about the organism. So recommendations, direct recommendations for control, things you aren't already doing, I don't know. This is really about gaps, the hand hygiene, using clean water, avoiding sewage leaks or spills into water, into the growing area. I can't come up with something better at this point in time. So with that, I will conclude my comments. I'll turn it back over to Billy. Happy to take any questions that you have. So Billy, back to you.